Hi guys, welcome back to another sewing tutorial video. This is a continuation of my previous video on how to sew curved hems. One of the best ways to sew curved hems, frills and flounces is called the narrow rolled hem, also known as the baby hem. This type of hem is best used on light or medium weight fabric, particularly fabric that frays easily. It creates a tiny hem which completely encloses the raw edge with no bulkiness. Narrow hems are essential for hemming frills, flounces and circular hems because it creates a beautiful lightweight look. Today we'll be learning 2 ways to sew narrow hems with either your sewing machine or overlocker. I hope you'll give this technique a try for yourself on your next sewing project. Let's get started! Today I'll be making 2 dresses with narrow rolled hems. The pattern I'm using today is McCall's 7894 in view C and D. This dress has many frills that need narrow rolled hems, including the bottom hem. For view C, I've made this dress in a chiffon and I'll be using my overlocker to make a narrow hem. I've also made view D in a narrow light cotton Swiss dot fabric and I'm going to use my sewing machine to make a perfect rolled hem. All narrow hems on this dress have a hem allowance of 1.5 centimeters. Check the bottom of your pattern for what the hem allowance is for yours. Otherwise, I would suggest using a hem allowance of 1.5 centimeters. If you're sewing a narrow hem on the bottom of skirts and dresses, you'll need to level the skirt beforehand. Hang the garment for at least 24 hours on a coat hanger or on your dress form. Over time, the bias or the diagonal of the fabric will stretch and distort your nice straight hem. By hanging it up beforehand and leveling the hem, we can prevent this. Next, we'll measure an even hem. For the best results, hang the garment on a dress form. If you have a waist seam, it should be straight. Adjust the hem gauge to the height of the shortest raw edge of the garment. Generally, this will be the center back or the side seam. My hem gauge has a notch in the middle, so I'm going to adjust it so that the raw edge runs through this notch. Now we can start measuring the hem. Turn the dress form so that the garment runs smoothly through the hem gauge. Make sure that the garment is straight, but don't try and pull the garment down. Let it hang naturally. If the raw edge falls below the notch, then place a pin at the notch. The pin represents where the new raw edge needs to be cut. Try and place a pin at least every 5 centimeters. Keep doing this all the way around the skirt. Once you're done, you have a nice line of pins to show you where you need to cut. Normally I would use tailor's chalk to make a nice line to cut on, but this is chiffon and the chalk just brushes off. So I'm going to carefully cut from pin to remove the excess fabric. Now we're ready to make the narrow rolled hems. I'm going to sew narrow rolled hems on my chiffon dress with an overlocker. This is an easy, no-fuss method for sewing narrow rolled hems. It's particularly useful if your fabric is delicate or frays easy. You'll need an overlocker which has a narrow rolled hem function. For the best look, you also need 3 matching overlocking threads. Take the piece that you need to narrow hem over to your ironing board. On the wrong side of the fabric, turn up the raw edge by your hem allowance using a tape measure. I'm folding up the raw edge by 1.5 centimeters, then pressing with my iron on the appropriate setting. I'm using a synthetic setting for chiffon. At this point, you can pin into place, but I prefer not to use pins with an overlocker. As long as the fabric is well pressed, it should be good to go. Today I'll be using a 3-thread narrow hem setting, but you can also use a 2-thread setting for very light fabrics. Each overlocker is different, so be sure to look at your manual before attempting the setting. I'm going to re-thread the machine with my matching colour. This type of stitch only uses 1 needle, so take the other one out if you have it. Change the tension setting and other dials to create a rolled hem. To make this hem, I won't be using a cutter to have more control. Before you sew your fabric, you need to test the tension. Fold in half a piece of scrap fabric. Sew the narrow rolled hem on top of the fold. Check that the stitching is even and closely spaced. Make sure that the fabric isn't tensing up or too loose. Now we can sew the main fabric. We need to sew with the right side facing up. Lift the foot and feed the fold into the machine. The fold needs to line up precisely with the needle to create the best look. Start sewing and feed the fabric into the machine. As you sew, line up the fabric with the groove in the needle plate for the right needle. Once you're done, keep sewing so that you leave a long tail of thread at the end. Cut the thread so that there's a centimetre or two left on the fabric and leave the rest on the machine. Using your scissors, carefully trim off the excess hem allowance as much as possible. If the end of the overlocking isn't going to be inside of a seam, then you need to finish it. I like to fold away the threads so they're hidden on the inside. I'm then going to use a little fabric glue to hold it. The glue dries clear, so it looks really neat and can't be seen from the outside of the dress. This is a quick and easy method to sew a narrow hem on even the fiddliest of fabrics. But what if you don't have an overlocker or prefer basic seams? Next we'll be learning my favourite method for narrow rolled hems. For this method of narrow rolled hems, we'll be using our sewing machine. This method is suitable for light and medium weight fabrics and is very good if you need to narrow hem over seams. Again, I'll be doing this rolled hem on a frill with a hem allowance of 1.5 centimeters. The actual size of my hem will be about 2 millimeters. Depending on the thickness of your fabric, you might need to use a larger hem. So at the moment, we need to fold up the hem by the excess amount, which is about 1.3 centimeters for me. I'm folding up the raw edge of the frill on the wrong side with my tape measure. Press into place with your iron and pin. At your sewing machine, you need to change the stitch length to the maximum on the straight stitch. Change your thread to a contrasting color. Grab your fabric. We need to sew directly on the fold with a long basting stitch. Sew down the length of the hem. We're doing this to create a nice crisp fold. The contrasting color will help you remove this stitch later. Grab a pair of scissors. Carefully trim off all the seam allowance up to the basting that you just made. Be careful to cut through only one layer of fabric, and not to cut through the basting. Bring the fabric up to the iron. On the wrong side, roll up the fold by just 2 millimeters, or as small of a hem as possible. The more of the seam allowance that you cut off, the easier this will be. Use your iron to press the hem and pin into place. Back at your sewing machine, change your stitch length back to normal and use a matching thread colour for both the bobbin and the upper thread. Bring the fabric to the needle, sew directly on top of the hem fold. Take your time to do this and sew as close to the fold as you can to create a neat hem. Once you're done, you need to carefully unpick the basting on the wrong side. And here it is, the final product. You're left with just one line of stitching and a beautiful tiny hem. If you've done this right, there shouldn't be any raw edges in sight. It's neat, light, and perfect for frills, flounces, and circular hems. Thanks for joining me in another sewing technique tutorial video. Today we learn how to make narrow rolled hems with either an overlocker or a sewing machine. I hope you'll give this technique a try for yourself next time you're trying to make frills or flounces. The results will surprise you. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching!